All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whomever you are, wherever you are. This is Dr. Patrick Lockwood coming back to you live. And today I plan to go a little bit off the rails and talk about something that might have some negative consequences, but what the hell? Here we are, it's 2019, it's April, and I feel like I haven't said enough incendiary things yet, so why not do some of that today? I figure. So, I want to talk about the concept of privilege because I think we're getting out of control. Or maybe we've been out of control for a while. I mean, people have been rambling on stupidly about the concept of privilege for about a decade now in the United States, at least. Um, and I don't think most people, even academics who are researching or writing about this topic, understand what they're talking about, which is sad because I'm not a social psychologist, I'm a clinical psychologist. So the fact that I have what I'm going to describe a little bit later in this talk is a more nuanced, more thoughtful approach towards the concept of privilege than people who are in academia trying to study this concept is sad. It's pathetic that academia has become this echo chamber, this kind of gross organization that doesn't actually think critically about anything anymore. At least in terms of the social sciences like psychology, sociology, etc. The hard sciences seem to be safe for now. So I want to talk about why, in my opinion at least, why the identity-focused version of privilege based on your skin color, white privilege, and your sexual preferences, hetero privilege, etc. It's kind of a stupid way of looking at the concept of privilege, even if you just understand the dictionary definition of privilege. I'm not going to spend time critiquing, so to speak, because there are tons of people who have spoken about this. And I'll post an article or a link, not a link, but a reference of an article that you will get more out of reading than me rambling about it for 15 minutes. And the title of the article is The Invisibility of Privilege, a critique of intersectional models of identity. And this is back in 2008, so that's 11 years ago at this point. So I'm going to post that citation and the references or caption, and you take a look and you read it, and it will explain rather succinctly what I would also say here rather stupidly. So I'm not going to waste my time explaining why the idea of privilege based upon identity is theoretically flawed, philosophically dangerous and stupid, and detrimental to a cohesive society, because there are tons of brilliant people like Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, the Weinstein brothers, Jonathan Haidt, Steven Pinker, and many other very, very smart people who definitely would be more articulate about the concept than I will be, who've already talked about it. So I'll just suffice to say that the identity-based version of privilege is sophomoric and infantile. It does not actually require any critical thinking skills to go, you're white, so you're privileged, or you're black, so you're privileged, or whatever. That's really fucking stupid, and it doesn't actually serve anyone. So what I would propose is that we rethink the concepts, because I think there is a utility to examining how systems and groups of people favor other groups of people, in groups, out groups, etc. Exploring this dynamically from the perspective of social psychology or evolutionary psychology or anthropology or whatever is extremely valuable, because the more we kind of are self-reflective as a society, the more we can grow and change in appropriate ways. But because of how stupid people are becoming and the ridiculous cries of racism, heterosexism, so go watch my talk on toxic masculinity, Islamophobia, etc., I want to try and shift our narrative and our idea about the concept of privilege and identity politics. Because I think if we don't shift the narrative soon, if people like Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and all of them are not successful in shifting the narrative, then I think we're stuck. I think we're kind of screwed. And as I discussed in my book, we've lost the ability to talk rationally with each other, to have a simple discussion about, like, how are you built as a person? How do genetics influence you? How does your family circumstance influence you? your job, your SES? How does all this influence you as a person and either make it easier or more difficult for you to function in the world? That's a very simple discussion. The variables I just listed are very simple to explore, but we can't do that anymore because we're too afraid, thus the book. So my problem is, because this identity version of privilege brings up all these instinctual kind of mindsets and reactionary styles, like I talk about in the book, the tribalistic instinct, us versus them, etc. I'm going to propose that we look at the concept of privilege in a way that's not inflammatory, that's not incendiary, doesn't inflame our, let's say, tribalistic instinct in any way, shape, or form. So the first way I want to talk about how privilege might be best analyzed includes the concept of earned versus inherited privilege. And I'll explain the difference in a second, or at least my perspective of the difference. And then the second way I want to talk about the concept of privilege, and maybe we'll have a more rational discussion, is the concept of dynamic privilege analysis, not identity privilege analysis. Now, again, I'm aware, I think, of the fact that this is not a popular thing to discuss. And for any of you who feel offended about the fact that I'm not supporting your kind of, very unsophisticated view of privilege, and you're angry at me or upset, you need to calm down, because this is not a complicated or personal thing for me. This is a philosophical and academic thing that we all need to explore openly and thoughtfully. Because if we don't, we're screwed as a society. Because this instinctual way of operating with the social justice warrior types and the radical leftist types, or however you would like to describe it, because I don't care. But the people who are more radical and who are being reactionary and asking people to get fired and harassing people online on Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff, those kinds of people are destroying the world, and they're not helping the cause. In fact, you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're one of those radical Antifa morons. So I think we need to have a more thoughtful discussion. And I think that the frameworks I've outlined so far, the earned versus the inherited and the dynamic perspective, are going to be more useful simply because they don't activate these instincts that make you go out and say and do stupid things. Now, I can fully admit that, there's something in me, there's a bias or something in me that makes me want to do this as well. I'm not perfect or anything. I mean, if you've been watching me on Minds for the past week, my Minds profile has just been inundated with like Bill Burr, because I think Bill Burr is hilarious first and foremost. But I've had a little bit of an angry week, and if I get a little angry here, please forgive me. It's not anything personal towards any of you. It's just I'm kind of over the stupidity of the world for this week. So just keep that in mind. I'm flawed, I get it, but I think my ideas are solid. So if you're going to come at me about my ideas, please do, but don't be stupid and come at me for my identity, because you don't even know how I might identify. I might identify as a who knows what I might identify as. The sad thing is I just self-censored, because I could get fired if I made some kind of joke or aggressive statement about self-identification as a woman or as a trans or as black or purple or green or whatever. It's sad, pathetic world we live in. I'm about to get into a Bill Burr angry moment here, so I'm going to calm down for a second. Okay, so rant and tangent aside, let's talk about, or let me explain what I believe one of the more useful ways of looking at privilege is the earned versus the inherited way of thinking about privilege. So on the surface, these concepts are pretty straightforward. There are things that you do in the world. You work very hard, you put a lot of effort into something, and you earn it, right? So for me, earned privilege would be best summed up in the example of, the entrepreneur or the business person. The person who goes out there, creates a company, has an idea for a product or a service, and they just bust their ass for weeks, months, and years to finally make it happen. They create a brand new guitar pick, and it's made of this weird composite of graphite and plastic, polyurethane, or maybe a softer version of a metal like tin or something, and they bust their ass for a year to mass produce like 1,000 of them, and finally they get some musician to, like, buy them and sell them and promote them on social media and stuff, and then they make $1 billion because they made the perfect guitar pick, right? That's an example of earned privilege. You earned that $1 billion that gives you access to money and status and what have you, right? That's earned privilege. It's a privilege to have all that stuff because you've earned the money that got you there, right? And then there's the example of inherited privilege. So the concept of inherited privilege might seem a little wonky at first, so stick with me because I don't intend to be a eugenicist. So just stick with me. So when you talk about the concept of inherited privilege, or when I do, I'm referring to two different things. I'm referring to your genes that affect the way you physically function and psychologically function in the world. So your genes for height, your genes for body fat composition, metabolism, your genes for bone structure, etc. Because some people just have a brilliant bone structure that makes them great models, etc. All that stuff. And then you have, so you've inherited the genes. And then the other thing, and you've inherited genes for IQ and personality and temperament and all that stuff. And you can call me a racist, but whatever. Then there's the gene. And then the other thing you inherit is your family and your family culture. Because some people are born into a culture that is either more hardworking, more thoughtful, more resilient, etc. So you inherit your culture and you inherit your genes. And inherited privilege, again, the easy example would be like, a model. Like some people, and I've worked with a couple models professionally, some people just have phenomenal bone structure, and because of their metabolism, etc., they can eat whatever the fuck they want, whenever they want. They still have great hair and minimal body fat and good definition and da 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 da, and they're always gorgeous no matter what, even when they're like 65, right? And that's just inherited privilege. They have the privilege of being hot no matter what, right? Some of them have to work their ass off, some don't. So you can see already how both the earned and the inherited privilege are on a spectrum, because some things are more genetically loaded. So like IQ, body fat composition, metabolism, these things are more inherited than they are affected by, your circumstances. Now you can change your metabolism through diet and exercise and all sorts of stuff and good sleep, etc. You can change your hormones. You can get bone sculpting. You can go to a plastic surgeon and they can reshape your nose, da 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 da. You can earn that, so to speak. But some things are more inherited, some things are more earned. So your privilege is not just you're black, you're white, you're straight, you're gay. It's bullshit. It's not that simple. And anyone who thinks that simple is a moron. And yes, I'm calling a bunch of academics who have PhDs morons. The other thing is, most of these facets of our identity, like our beauty or our, wealth, etc., these are not too stable. Sometimes these things change, right? Some of these things are less socially constructed, etc. So we need to think about that too whenever we're kind of realizing that maybe our privilege is not so simple. So that's the earned versus inherited argument, and I hope that makes sense to you all. The second thing is, what else? The second thing is the concept of dynamic assessments of privilege. So far, the identity version of privilege is black, white, straight, gay, lesbian, female, male, what have you. And I don't think that that's the most thoughtful way of looking at the concept of privilege, is just identitarian. I think there are three specific complex constructs that we can break down privilege by. So the first concept is popularity, which is complex. It's not as simple as it sounds. The second concept is luck-based privilege. And then the third concept is adaptability-based privilege. I think these three things are more sophisticated and useful ways of exploring the concept of privilege, because they actually get to the nuances and the dynamics of how someone might have that, let's say, level of access and honor and privilege to do things, etc. Special treatment, as it were. So let's talk about the concept of popularity first, because we're all very well aware of what popularity is like, especially if you grew up in your typical Western society. Popularity, you see the hierarchy show up in high school. Jenny's the popular girl, Brad's the popular jock, da 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 da. So we all kind of colloquially know what popularity is. And the nice thing about the concept of popularity or notability is it's malleable, it changes all the time, and it's dynamical, which means the changes are in kind of ebbs and flows based upon circumstances and kind of culture. So let's talk about how we could reshape the concept of race-based privilege to a popularity viewpoint. So again, the race-baiting social justice warrior morons would like to say that, white people have all the privilege in the world, or they have the majority of the privilege in the world, which I think is an insane way of looking at things, because it doesn't pan out, number one, in terms of just statistics and wealth and all sorts of things. But it's another argument, and I'm not Stefan Molyneux, so you can call me that, but that's not what I'm arguing here. I'm just trying to give you an example of how that might not necessarily be the case, especially if you look at it from the perspective of sports. So in the United States, at least, I don't know about in other cultures, but in the United States, many sports, basketball, football, etc., have not a bias, but there are more popular, successful African-American athletes for the last couple of decades than other races. Why would that be? So the easy example would be something like LeBron James. I like LeBron James, so this is not anything anti-Black or anti-LeBron James. I like him a lot. He's terribly popular, and he is an awesome basketball player. Awesome. He just came out here to LA to play with the Lakers. God bless him. Maybe something good will happen with the Lakers. Who knows? But he's extremely popular as well. Not only because Steph Curry is a great ball player, lots of great ball players, but LeBron's extremely popular, and he's extremely popular partially because of his skill. He's a great ball player, but also because of his character. And because of, let's say, the social and media dynamics, etc., that make it so that someone who has his skill and his character can be popular. Because there are quieter ball players who are just phenomenal, just like great ball players, but they don't have the same character or ego that he has. And they might have good skill, but maybe they don't have enough skill compared to him. So if you take a look at the concept of popularity and you break it down in the particular niche of basketball or the particular cultural dynamic of basketball, he's extremely popular, not because of his race, but because of his skill and because of his, character, the way he carries himself. There are tons and tons of brilliant African-American basketball players, but he's extremely popular with whites, blacks, and everyone else because of his skill and his character. Now, maybe my view is biased. Maybe there's a bias here that I'm not paying attention to in myself, and I'll perfectly own that, So he's got some obvious genetic gifts. He's got obvious genetic gifts like height, right? He's really tall. And he's got good coordination, which he probably inherited to a degree, But he's also worked his ass off playing basketball and honing his craft. Now, in other markets and in other cultures, would his basketball skills, would his character skills be as useful? Right? If he were running a certain kind of business, would that be as useful? Maybe, maybe not, right? If he were a nurse, would those skills be as useful? If he were a therapist, would those skills be as useful? I don't know. Now, before you all cry racism, I'm just pointing out an obvious example of the inherited versus earned dynamic that I talked about earlier. And if you look at the inherited versus earned dynamic with LeBron James in basketball, you see a very obvious inherited set of privilege with his height and all that good stuff. And you see an earned kind of like set of variables because he worked his ass off and he's grown up and been a good character, right? And you could come up with obvious and easy examples for every other race and ethnicity across other cultures and domains. So like you can do it with sports, you can do it with jobs, you can do it with other systems and structures. There are inherited and earned types of privilege that make people successful and popular. So calm down. I just picked LeBron since he's crazy popular and I dig how he plays basketball. So what my point is, from the perspective of popularity, you can have privilege if you're more popular. And you can be more popular, because of things that you've earned, things that you've done. You can be popular because of things that you are, things that you have inherited, right? And, popularity brings access to attention and sexual partners, wealth, and kind of other evolutionary needs. And again, popularity changes over time. Right now, he's hot shit. But in 50 years, will people be talking about him as much as they do right now? Will he be as popular right now? Or will he end up like Larry Bird, Larry Bird was crazy popular in the 80s, crazy, crazy popular. But nowadays, you don't hear people talking about him as much. His popularity has waned because, times have changed, right? Values have changed, right? It's not racist that now there are more popular African-American basketball players. It's just times have changed. Values have changed. So now people like LeBron are crazy fucking popular, which is awesome because he's a killer basketball player. Anyways, so popularity, I think, is one important way of looking at privilege because it's somewhat in your control, it's somewhat not in your control. And that's my point. It's somewhat earned, it's somewhat, inherited, etc. So I hope that makes sense. And then the second dynamic, because it's sort of like correlated. So the second dynamic is luck. And I know that might not sound very sophisticated, just like popular, but just stick with me. So the definition of luck I've always liked is when hard work and preparation meets opportunity. So if you want to talk about someone's privilege, you might want to be curious about how lucky they are in the world. Because sometimes in life, we can make our own opportunities, like back to the entrepreneur. And sometimes we cannot because the system is created to function rather narrowly. So back to basketball, for example, because for some reason today is a sports day. If you look at people like LeBron James, you don't ever hear anyone on ESPN or in scientific journals or on CNN or Fox News. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that LeBron James has tall privilege. I've never heard that. I've never heard anyone say tall privilege. I think that's a really stupid way of looking at the way we work. However, he is absolutely lucky that he's so freaking tall because nowadays, most great basketball players are pretty tall, right? Now, you can talk about people like Steve Nash, who's a little bit shorter back when he played on the Phoenix Suns, etc. And some shorter people do keep up with the giant dudes who play basketball, and they're killing it. But generally speaking, the taller basketball players are the ones who are killing it on the court. It's just he's got good luck with those genetics. So this might seem like a reshaping of popularity, but I think it's a separate way of looking at things because I think it allows us to have a more humble view of how certain people turn out and certain people make it. Again, some people by luck just have more access to play sports because they're taller. They've got better genes to be physically active. Like I've got terrible genes to be active. I just do. I don't come from a background where people are physically active. I got bad genes. Now, I'm not saying I'm a victim to my bad genes because I work out 6 days a week and do everything I can to be physically healthy and be flexible and, work on my coordination and all that stuff. But I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to be a great basketball player or something, especially compared to LeBron. You have to account for luck. If I were 6'9" and had a little more, if I worked my ass off to play more basketball, I might be able to have fun playing with him. But right now I would just get trashed because I don't have the good luck of having good genes, right? So luck is just a thing that we need to take into account. I know that doesn't seem very fancy or academic, but it makes sense to me. Some people just have good luck. Some people grow up in rich families, which is both a blessing and a curse because a lot of rich people are fucked up, emotionally just messed up. Anyways, tangent aside. So far we've talked about popularity as a way of slicing and dicing privilege. The second thing is luck, because some shit's just out of your control. You're born into the wrong country at the wrong time, or you're born into the right place at the right time, and that's luck. And that's pretty much out of your control. And if you have good genes that meet the right environment to express those genes in the right culture, you might be even more lucky and you might be even more successful, right? So if you're born with really good genes to learn and be smart, and then you're born into a very academic family, and then they're also wealthy, and the culture around you says use your intelligence to be successful in the world, you might be a kick-ass physics professor or writer or something, right? So that's genes plus environment plus luck because of culture, etc. All this stuff, you can't factor that out, I think. And then the final way I would slice and dice privilege, and again, this is not for me being like a eugenicist or some kind of real social Darwinist. So please bear with me. I'm not. This is not me advocating for anything that sounds, alt-right or anything, social Darwinist of that nature. This is just a concept that might be worth thinking about. So the third concept is just adaptive value. An adaptive value, or instinctually adaptive value, is how I would phrase it. 3 parts: instinctually adaptive value. Now, what do I mean by that? Where does that come from? So I'm pulling the concept of instinctually adaptive value as the opposite of adaptive problems, which is an evolutionary psych and anthropology term that authors like Cosmides and Tooby discuss. And I'm going to put the link to their article in the caption so you can read about it, adaptive problems, etc. But my concept of instinctually adaptive value comes from how we're built to handle adaptive problems. And adaptive problems are those kinds of problems that show up over and over and over again, and the problems that impede successful reproduction or steps to reproduction. So that's the evolutionary perspective on adaptive problems. So for me, instinctually adaptive value would be those instincts or those traits that you have that make you more adaptive, that allow you to either reproduce better or succeed and strive better. I simply mean that we have instincts, typically ancient instincts, that were honed over thousands of years that have set us up for reproductive success. So some of those instincts show up in behaviors in a very patterned way that we all typically like. And some of our instincts, our evolutionarily adaptive instincts, show up in a patterned way that we do not like. For example, we all typically do not like cheating. And cheating is a very complex social behavior, but we don't like cheating. So we have kind of a fairness instinct that we typically adhere to across business and relationship circumstances. And, the easy example of this is we typically just like cheating, in politics and business because, all this nonsense about Donald Trump and Russia and all that crap, which again, I'm going to claim ignorance on. I don't really know what the heck's going on nowadays, but one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons people could not stand or cannot stand Donald Trump is because they think he cheated. That's not the only reason, but it's one. And we have a fairness instinct that's like, hey, we need to reciprocate and work mutually and openly and in a kind of a capitalistic negotiating kind of way. And if we cheat, that's not working collaboratively. And then if you look at just the social psych research, the clinical psych research, typically speaking, we like people who don't cheat. We give them more jobs, we treat them well, we associate more with them, we mate with them, etc. So you could say that people who are more prone to cheating or who have more antisocial behavior like theft have less evolutionarily instinctive adaptive value by most compared to those who are more pro-social and cheat less. So basically, you can kind of have good person privilege according to how our instincts work. So my third theory, again, not to be a social Darwinist, not to be a eugenicist, is just we have all these instincts and we are so good at reading how people are activating our instincts, even though we fail or we get tricked. We still have enough of an ability to read how people are activating our instincts that if you are just either by luck or through popularity or through hard work, you've honed your instincts or used your instincts appropriately, you can have kind of like good for my survival privilege, so to speak. Because again, back to the cheating example, you're bad for my survival. I don't want to be around you. Bernie Madoff, Anthony Weiner, Donald Trump, every politician who ever gets caught hooking up in the bathroom, everyone who's cheating, Whether you're left or right, black or gay or straight or purple, I don't give a fuck. If you're cheating, people tend to not like you. So there's a number of instincts that we have, some of which I discuss in our book, that make you more popular, that make you more lucky, that make you more likely to be perceived as lucky or popular. So you might have good person privilege. You might have instinctually adaptive value, so to speak. And you might want to evaluate your privilege based upon your instinctually adaptive value. Now, that's a very complex, very nuanced discussion you get to have because there are tons of instincts, and they show up in tons of ways. So you'd actually have to do a lot of legitimate self-reflection to see if you're the kind of person who's capitalizing on their evolutionary instincts in an adaptive way, and if that's part of why they're privileged, so to speak, or why they have privilege to, let's say, succeed more in the world. You know? Being disagreeable is really good for business, right? If you read the Big Five personality research, high conscientiousness, low agreeableness, typically speaking, makes you more successful at business. And some of that's inherited and some of that's honed through life. Some of it's instinctual. Like if you're disagreeable, you have to be instinctually accurate about knowing how to work someone and disagree with someone and barter and bargain and negotiate with people. Some of that's instinctual because your fairness chip is going off like crazy when you're bartering and negotiating, right? So basically, these are the three ways that I would propose we look at privilege: popularity, luck, and instinctually adaptive value. And everything that you can talk about in each of these three concepts should be sliced and diced from the perspective of both inherited and earned privilege. That's how I would break it down. I think this is a more thoughtful and more serious way of discussing privilege as opposed to you're white, so you have privilege, or you're black, so you have privilege here, right? I could easily just say LeBron James is black, so therefore he has privilege in the basketball world, which is really fucking stupid because his skin color, in my experience of like watching news commentators and hearing basketball players talk, they don't give two shits. They care if you have good character, you're a good teammate, good leader, and they care if you're a good baller. That's what they care about. So anyways, I seriously propose that we shift our narrative around privilege because I think we're destroying ourselves, and this sophomoric and simplistic and ignorant way of looking at privilege just creates more conflict. And this is something I talked about seriously in my book, The Fear Problem. Get it on Amazon, Mascot Books, etc. And my website, patricklockwoodhealing.com, blah, 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 blah. Get the book. Learn to check your instincts a little better. Again, the identity or biology-driven privilege debate is kind of stupid. It's overly simplistic, and we're more complex as creatures than that, even though we still have these very simplistic instinctual processes that make us do crazy things. You know, and I think it's, in my opinion, I think it makes us even more dumb when we say things like check your privilege. It's like, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to sit there and meditate and totally just give up, abnegate all of your benefits that you have either earned or inherited and be like, nope, I'm going to give away all the $1 million that I made. I feel so terrible that I was born into a family with, values that were adaptive for the culture that made me rich. That's what you're supposed to do? That's stupid. That's ridiculous. That doesn't serve people. So my proposal is that we're less stupid as a society. This includes me. Let's be less stupid. Let's be more thoughtful. Let's be more rational. Now, it's hard to be rational consistently, back to the Daniel Kahneman thinking fast, thinking slow perspective. But if we can do more, if we can be more thoughtful, use more of our frontal and prefrontal cortex, we might have a better chance of fixing some of these bigger social dynamics like racism, prejudice, anti-LGBT, whatever, economic disparities that are unreasonable. Like, we might be able to fix some of this if we just have a more nuanced and more thoughtful view of how these concepts like privilege or racism or whatever work. So that's my proposal. I hope this has made some version of sense to y'all. And I appreciate those of you who are commenting. Our book, Bobby. Um, I hope this makes sense. I would look forward to any and all feedback and comments. So please leave a comment if you disagree. Please leave a comment if you agree. Share, like, subscribe, all that good crap. Just let me know what you think, because I want ideas to evolve. One of my goals with doing all this YouTube stuff and taking up a lot of my time is to help our kind of national conversation evolve. And I don't think we can do that if we keep using the same old tired ideas. So here I am going way outside the scope of clinical psychology and just tossing out a brand new idea because it just seems like it's useful. I hope this makes sense to you. And I will see you all again in about a week. Have a good rest of your week, good rest of your Sunday, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.